Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, May 16th. New numbers from Oxford Economics suggest that Ottawa's counter tariffs against the U.S. in their current form amount to next to nothing. The economic advisory firm is estimating that the 6-month exemption Ottawa announced for counter tariffs on the U.S. in April applies to about 97% of targeted U.S. goods. In short, Canada won't really start punching back until October at the earliest. A Leger poll suggests that 2/3 of Canadians are in favor of dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs, but notes that support has dipped by 10 points since February. Global business leaders and diplomats gathered in Ottawa today with an eye on charting a path through the United States tariff war. The B7 conference in the capital is a partner event to the G7 summit set for next month in Alberta. U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra and Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, who was Mr. Trump's rival for the Republican presidential nomination, were among those speaking today. And a new Leger poll suggests that nearly half of Canadians think Prime Minister Mark Carney clearly stood up for Canada's interest in his recent face-to-face meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. 24% of the 1,500 respondents surveyed online last week say that Mr. Carney should have taken a stronger stance. Mr. Carney publicly rejected Mr. Trump's calls for Canada to become part of the United States during their first in-person bilateral meeting in Washington. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration says that fentanyl super laboratories in Canada are a growing source of concern. The DEA's previous annual report made no mention of Canada. This year's edition points out that the RCMP dismantled a sophisticated drug lab in BC last October and says these kinds of operations have potential to expand. Donald Trump has used cross-border traffic in fentanyl to justify his tariffs on imports of Canadian goods. Raging wildfires in eastern Manitoba have triggered evacuations and claimed the lives of 2 people. The victims of the wildfire burning near Lac des Bonnie have been identified as Richard and Sue Noel. Some 28 cottages and homes in the rural municipality were also destroyed. The province is also reaching out for more help, asking the national agency in charge of wildfire resource sharing to send in 80 additional firefighters. Following the Winnipeg Jets game last night, Jets head coach Scott Arniel said his thoughts are with those impacted by the wildfires in Manitoba.
It's getting close to home for all of us, and there's a lot of people that are, in tough situations right now. Pray for safety for all those people, but also our, first responders, our firefighters, everybody that's in the middle of that. That's real life. This is hockey. This is sport. That's real life, and we hope they're safe and can, do what they have to do to protect everybody. It is unfortunate, and we've seen it across this country there the last few years, and but at the end of the day, hopefully that we can go out and win a hockey game for those people, and they're all part of our may not be here in the building tonight, but they are part of Manitoba and Winnipeg that are behind the Jets.
The uncertainty from tariffs helped Canada's home sales drop by almost 10% last month over the same time a year ago. Canadian Real Estate Association senior economist Sean Cathcart says buyers are staying on the sidelines, like during higher interest rates in 2022 and 2023. Vancouver area real estate agent Tim Hill says that a lot of potential buyers are waiting for more clarity on what the Canada-U.S. trade relationship will look like. Modular housing is getting more popular in Canada. Experts say it could play a significant role in addressing a shortage of affordable and supportive housing in the country. Prime Minister Mark Carney promised to create a housing plan that would yield 500,000 new homes annually, and later said that modular housing could be part of an entirely new Canadian housing industry.
Our goal is to double the pace of housing construction to almost 500,000 new homes every single year. Homes you can afford to buy. Homes that are more sustainable and cost less to live in. Homes made right here with Canadian ingenuity, Canadian labor, Canadian products, including mass timber. The first part of our plan is to create an entirely new entity, Build Canada Homes, a lean, mission-driven organization that will do several things. First, it will act as a developer on new affordable housing projects. It will catalyze a new housing industry. It will provide financing for affordable home builders. Build Canada Homes will work with industry to build affordable homes at scale, including on public lands. We'll make good on the promise to unlock federal lands for home building on a post-war scale. Build Canada Homes will also provide $10 billion of low-cost financing to builders to construct deeply affordable homes for those most in need, as well as housing for students and seniors.
Toronto, Ottawa, and other cities in Ontario have already signed on to create modular housing in an effort to provide affordable options. And with just a few days under his belt as housing minister, Gregor Robertson is facing intense criticism from across the political spectrum over his comments about home prices, stating that building more supply won't lower prices. Our correspondent Adam Zivo reports.
Canada's new housing minister, Greg Robertson, caused a stir this month when he claimed that housing prices don't need to fall and that the government should focus on building subsidized homes instead. His comments are economically illiterate and suggest that the Carney government isn't taking the national housing crisis seriously. Robertson said that he opposes bringing prices down because, for most Canadian families, their most valuable asset is their home. Canadian homeowners made extraordinary amounts of money by purchasing homes 10 to 30 years ago and seeing the value of their properties explode. They were able to do this mostly because government policies artificially propped up Canada's housing bubble by restricting the construction of new homes. The trade-off, though, has been that the market is now so inflated and so unaffordable that home ownership is almost impossible for younger Canadians. Essentially, older and more established Canadians got rich at the expense of younger generations. You can't fix that problem without deflating the market as a whole. That's just basic economics, which the housing minister of all people should understand. Let's illustrate this with an example. The average cost of a Toronto home is around $1.1 million right now. Let's imagine that you want to make housing in the city more affordable and that your goal is to ensure that most people can buy a home at around $700,000. Okay, well, where are they going to buy these homes from? For the most part, existing homeowners. So if you want people to be able to easily buy homes at $700,000, you need a large number of existing homeowners who are willing to sell their homes at $700,000. It's just like how if you want buyers to have access to $2 coffee, you need a market where people are willing to sell coffee for $2. What the minister is proposing, though, is a nonsensical system where buyers and sellers operate on different prices. A system where buyers somehow have access to $700,000 homes, even though homeowners are only selling for $1.1 million. It's like saying that you want people to be able to buy $2 coffee, but only if cafes can continue selling $3 coffee. That just doesn't make any sense at all. So what's Minister Robertson's solution? He thinks that cheaper homes should be provided not by the market, but by the government with the help of enormous subsidies. But relying on subsidized housing just isn't workable, because not only is it extremely expensive to build, the government only has the capacity to produce a small amount of it. To illustrate, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation has committed almost $4 billion towards building just 16,000 subsidized units over several years. In contrast, Canada's private market produced around 250,000 units in 2024. Even if we were somehow able to immediately scale up government construction by over tenfold, the cost would bankrupt us as a country. While subsidized housing can help a sliver of disadvantaged Canadians get on their feet, it cannot fix the market as a whole. Essentially, Minister Robertson has proposed an impractical, economically illiterate solution to Canada's housing crisis. Also, that existing homeowners can profit off of a wildly inflated market at everyone else's expense. His message is essentially a middle finger to younger Canadians who are searching for change after being priced out of the Canadian dream. We shouldn't be surprised by this, though, because Minister Robertson has an awful record on housing. He was Vancouver's mayor from 2008 to 2018, and during his decade-long tenure, the average price of a single-family and semi-detached home rose by 179% throughout the Metro Vancouver area. Minister Robertson never took responsibility for his failures and habitually blamed other levels of government, saying that they didn't provide enough subsidies for more home building. Yet, up until the final months of his tenure, he seemed perfectly fine with maintaining restrictive zoning laws that throttled supply and kept prices high. And, more recently, he has defended the use of extortionate development fees that unfairly tax new homeowners and further drive up costs. If the Carney government wants to fix Canada's housing crisis, this is not a great start. The country deserves credible policy proposals and a credible housing minister, neither of which are being provided.
Canada's most populous province expects that U.S. tariffs will leave it with a $14.6 billion deficit this year. Thursday's spending plan also forecasts slower economic growth and a one-year delay in balancing the budget to 2027. Ontario's finance minister said, quote, "We need to bolster our economy by investing in our promising industries."
We need to achieve this reality because future generations depend on it. And we need to leverage every tool at our disposal to make that happen. Whether it is our competitive advantage in critical minerals, in energy, technology, talent, and our workers, or any other area, we will need to bolster our economy by investing in our powerful and promising industries, by building more, by building faster, and by protecting jobs and creators. And by doing so, we achieve long-term prosperity. After all, a strong economy provides the necessary revenues to invest in education, housing, and health care. And so the next question is, how? How will Ontario stand to face the challenges before us and deliver the economy that our future depends on?
The budget contains about $30 billion in spending to shore up Ontario's economy in the face of tariffs. It includes a business relief fund, adding about $5 billion to an infrastructure financing fund, plus creating a new critical minerals processing fund. And the recently re-elected Liberal government isn't planning to release a budget this year, opting instead for an economic statement later this fall. Typically, the budget is tabled in March or April and passed before the House rises in June. But a 2025 budget hasn't been put forward yet since Parliament was prorogued in January and the election campaign began in March. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne told reporters after Wednesday's cabinet meeting that his number one priority is to pass legislation to implement a promised tax cut, which Carney has said will be in place by Canada Day.
The fiscal year has already begun. When are you going to have a framework for the public finances for the year?
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Shouldn't there be one as soon as possible in the fiscal year? You're going to leave it to the second half?
That's what I'm saying. So let's take it step by step. Canadians understand that.
I think we heard the steps.
No, but it's not very complicated. But why? Because it needs to go in well, I would say because you need to go in a sequence that is logical. The first thing you do is the first step of this government is a middle class tax cut. That's the first thing. You start with that. Then you say, well, you need to have a throne speech to say what are the priorities of the government. And once you've done that, then you do an economic statement, which is going to be the fall economic statement. So this is the logical piece.
Year at this point, right?
Well,
we're just going to go fall without a budget.
Fall is fall, you know. I could not be clearer than that. Fall is fall. So fall 2025.
Last year fall was December. Last year fall was December. It could be nearly a year.
We're, you know, you will see with this government, and you've seen it with this prime minister, we're very clear. You know, that's why we say this morning there's 3 steps. It's very clearly outlined. And I would say Canadians have seen the priorities that we have outlined during the campaign. Priorities are not going to be different. You know, we provided a frame during the campaign. We said, you know, we need to fight for Canadians. So we're going to be there to protect Canadians and industry with respect to U.S. tariff. We're going to protect workers and industry, and we're going to build this country. So the frame remains the same, and in the building of the country, we need to invest in defense.
Is that why no budget this year?
We invest in infrastructure, and we're going to invest in housing.
We're now joined by our correspondent, Wyatt Sharp, to discuss the implications of the federal government not releasing a fiscal budget. Wyatt, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you so much.
Now, can you explain why the government is opting for an economic statement instead of a full budget this year?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly could be a number of reasons, but it does strike me as a little bit odd. Usually, governments want to kind of present a budget at the earliest opportunity that they can get to try and kind of showcase what their government is looking to do and kind of bring some new kind of voices and some new policy ideas to the table. Of course, a lot of people are kind of skeptical with respect to Mark Carney and Francois-Philippe Champagne because they were both part of the Justin Trudeau government. People saying maybe it's just kind of a continuation. But one of the kind of logistical and perhaps policy reasons for why this is happening is that anytime there's a budget presented in the House of Commons, they don't only present the budget, but then what's called the Budget Implementation Act has to get passed by Parliament. And that sometimes can feel like a very bureaucratic process that can take months. Sometimes, it doesn't end up even getting passed until the fall, which is when Francois-Philippe Champagne is saying the economic statement is going to be delivered. So again, the government is saying right now, we don't want to present a budget when in reality that budget might not be able to get enacted by the time we provide this fall economic statement. Now, I will also say, though, Francois-Philippe Champagne is saying that the middle class tax cut that they have proposed is still going to be implemented over the course of the next few weeks when Parliament resumes on May the 26th, despite not having kind of the budget as the structure for implementing that tax cut.
And historically, how unusual is it for a government not to release a budget, especially following an election?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty atypical. I mean, the only time governments really haven't presented a budget was over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was kind of because there was a lot of funding going out at all different times for a whole host of different segments of the populations and government agencies. And so kind of presenting a budget would have just provided more kind of government revenue on top of that. The deficit would have become even larger. Whereas, this time is kind of the only time that I can think of, at least going back to like the 1960s, 1970s, where government just point blank said we're not going to be providing a budget without really providing a concrete reason for doing that. There have been some instances where budgets have been delayed due to various circumstances, but usually they do still end up getting presented at some point. Although, again, as I had pointed out, it seems as if right now we're just going to have to wait until the economic statement, which in effect is kind of like a mini budget. It just doesn't kind of come with as much bureaucratic kind of background and process of trying to get it passed.
What are the immediate implications of not having a formal budget for Canadians, especially for provinces, municipalities, and federal departments relying on funding clarity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, to kind of break it down into three different components, if you look at federal departments, they can obviously face uncertainty specifically with respect to planning, executing programs without kind of those clear budget allocations in place. But there's also, as you pointed out, provinces and municipalities who rely on federal budgets to forecast kind of funding for healthcare infrastructure. I mean, the provinces get their healthcare transfers from the federal government. Healthcare is obviously in a dire state right now in all really of the 13 provinces and territories. So that could prove to be pretty detrimental. And then also, a lot of credit agencies, investors in Canada, especially with these tariffs right now, a lot of investors are looking to Canada and they're wondering, why would we want to invest in a place like Canada, who obviously where there is great economic uncertainty and there's no budget to kind of show how we're going to get out of that economic uncertainty. It certainly sends kind of a bad signal to some of these credit rating agencies, to various investors, which could ultimately affect Canada's financial reputation on the global stage as well.
And Finance Minister Champagne said that his top priority is passing the promised tax cut legislation, as you've already mentioned. But what does that tell us about the government's fiscal and political priorities right now?
To me, it kind of suggests that they're trying to be different than Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau didn't really prioritize tax cuts, with the exception of when he first came into office in 2015. So Mark Carney doing that, perhaps trying to suggest that he wants to send relief to people who have been taxed pretty hard over the course of the past 10 years under Prime Minister Trudeau. But really, I mean, it's a personal kind of income tax reduction that's going to look at helping 22 million middle class citizens. That's the number that the government has been providing to reporters in recent days. And the government wants you to kind of believe that it is, underscoring their commitment to reducing the financial burden on middle income families and earners, and that it's going to help create economic growth. Their argument is that when we lower taxes and people are able to kind of contribute in more of a free market society, that's going to make it more likely that they want to go out, that they want to seek jobs, and that they want to contribute to our overall economy, which again, right now, especially with these tariffs, is not really in a great state.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about how Mark Carney signed the order in the same manner as President Trump signs executive orders. Can you walk us through what exactly Prime Minister Carney is signing, and how is it possible for a tax cut to be imposed without an act of Parliament?
Yeah, it's actually interesting you mentioned that because Mark Carney did something similar when the carbon tax was repealed. And it kind of has to do with some of the legislative loopholes that people can follow. Really, these are purely symbolic. They're not things that are actually going to be enacted until Parliament votes on it. So the actual implementation of this tax cut does require an act in Parliament, and the government plans to introduce that necessary legislation following the policy kind of agenda speech from the throne, as it is known, which is going to take place on May the 27th. And again, it doesn't actually force anything to happen. It doesn't actually create kind of what Mark Carney has done doesn't on its own provide the necessary kind of backing for this tax cut to move forward. Again, that requires an act of Parliament. But what it is doing is it's getting Mark Carney the headlines of saying, okay, we're going to implement this middle class tax cut. And then when it comes forward in the speech from the throne, that's kind of when it will actually go and when people can actually vote on it in the House of Commons, of course, members of Parliament. And it's not really a policy idea that's going to see a whole lot of resentment from MPs from any party, really, certainly not from the Conservatives or the Bloc Québécois, the NDP is a bit of a wild card at this point, but certainly there's a lot to watch for, and we'll be following it all.
Well, Wyatt, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you.
Jurors in the sexual assault trial of 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team have been discharged. Jurors in the case were dismissed after one of them submitted a note to the Ontario Superior Court Justice. The note said that some panel members felt defense lawyers for one of the accused were making fun of them. The trial began in late April and has heard evidence from several witnesses, including the complainant, who testified for 9 days. The trial will continue with the judge alone rather than with a jury. This morning in a press conference at Wasaga Beach, Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced the province is investing nearly $38 million to support Destination Wasaga.
As part of our plan to protect Ontario, we're investing in these destinations to protect our tourism industry and create new opportunities for workers and communities across this province. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that we're investing nearly $38 million to support Destination Wasaga. That's incredible, and thank you, everyone. That includes $25 million to rebuild Nancy Island, the historic site. That is a good one. I'm a big history buff, so I love these stories. The historic site of an important naval battle during the War of 1812. And that's why I said, I think President Trump's still holding a grudge that we burnt the White House down in 1812. So anyways, we're also investing $11 million to upgrade the town's downtown roads to support better access for tourists and residents and the creation of more than 3,000 homes. I couldn't believe the price of these properties you were telling me on the beach and the waterfront. That's going to create more tax revenue, which is fantastic.
First Nation leaders in BC are calling on Premier David Eby to immediately kill 2 pieces of legislation to fast-track projects. The bills are part of BC's response to U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip of the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs says that the government is asking them to trust that it won't misuse the bill's powers. But he says that it's unclear what the trust would be based on because it failed to adequately consult First Nations on the legislation. The Alberta Energy Regulator has approved a controversial coal exploration project in the Rockies. Northback Holdings' coal exploration project was rejected in 2021 when a panel ruled by mine's likely environmental effects outweighed potential economic benefits. The regulator says the company will only be able to draw water from a nearby and pit lake owned by Northback that's not directly connected to other bodies of water or rivers. It says the project won't have any effect on water quality or quantity downstream. And now it's time for our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Well, we're heading towards not only the long weekend, the first of summer, but the beginning of the summer demand driving season. Now that's an issue, a topic that I think has become more and more of a concern because it is having an effect on gas prices, not because it's a long weekend, but because demand starts usually at this time of year, and markets tend to reflect that. Next week, of course, the U.S. begins its Memorial Day long weekend, so this is really the time of the season where we do tend to see prices go up. And just for full disclosure, the only difference in price this year versus last year is strictly the carbon tax. A lot of people were thinking maybe it should have been more than that, but it was only 21 cents a liter, which is a lot. But many people believe it should have been 35. The reason we saw the carbon tax come off on April 1st, which meant a 20 cent a liter decrease, and then another 10 cent followed very quickly, because on the 2nd or 3rd of April, OPEC made a decision to restore a lot of its production quotas. So that caused oil to tumble, and with it, the price of gasoline. So we saw not a 20, but a 30 cent decrease, which of course was eventually eaten up or restored, if you will, by the fact that on the 15th of April, as we talked about here, Teresa, we switched from winter to summer gasoline. That's 6 cents a liter. And of course, we've seen gasoline futures move up probably about the equivalent of about another 5-6 cents a liter. So that 10 cent extra on top of the 20 is now gone. We're heading towards heavier demand for fuel. Lower prices is in fact encouraging more demand, and it really puts, of course, a lie to those who've been clinging to net zero, saying that fossil fuels will be gone. I note, by the way, Teresa, an organization that I've had to take on from time to time, the International Energy Organization, has come out and said, oh, there's no future. Divest yourself from fossil fuels. I know our friends over at Eurasia Group, who make up now a lot of Mark Carney's cabinet. Last interview I did with Evan Solomon was on that very topic. And I always knew that the International Energy Agency, which is supported by OECD countries and the G7 and others, has a tendency to try to overestimate the green climate nonsense, while at the same time walking away from their fundamental responsibility to ensure energy security. And they failed miserably when it came to oil and gas, because they obviously didn't anticipate what was going to happen, and may have a lot to do with what took place in Europe with energy being where they walked away from making their own oil and gas and natural gas production in favor of getting it from Russia. And of course, that hasn't turned out very well. But I digress. Back to Canada. We have to now look at the prospect this weekend. We'll see a slight decrease in gas prices, although up to today, we've seen some pretty big increases across the country, anywhere from 7 to 9 cents a liter for gasoline and about 4 to 5 cents a liter for diesel. Much of that, again, the result of exuberance of demand being very strong, notwithstanding the tariff trade war. The fact is that lower prices are in fact encouraging much higher demand. But we're also seeing this weekend what could be a 1 or 2 cent decrease. So across the country, Vancouver, which saw a 10 cent, 12 cent increase over the past 10 days, is now about to get a big decrease on Saturday morning of about 6 cents a liter. Same with Victoria. For the rest of British Columbia, that would mean, of course, places like Prince George and Kelowna and Kamloops, and further south, Kimberley and those places, expect a 3 cent drop on the weekend. So there is good news. If you can wait until Saturday to fill up, it's probably better rather than filling up on Friday. For Alberta, in the 133 range, heading down to about $1.28 on this weekend. So hold on for savings of a few cents. Not so much for Saskatchewan, still 131 to 135 tends to be the price we see there. In Manitoba, $1.30, although some places are a little lower than that. That's really only gas bars playing with and toying with their retail margins, what I call gas bar shenanigans. Ontario, as I mentioned earlier, moved up to $1.40, but moved back down to $1.38, likely by Sunday. 1 penny drop on Saturday, another penny drop on Sunday. And of course, like Quebec, which follows at $1.63 because they still have the carbon tax and higher taxes. What we're going to see is a bit of a decrease, especially on the retail margins. If you can wait until 6 p.m. every single day in major cities across Canada to buy your fuel, you're going to save a lot of money, not weekly, not monthly, but yearly. I estimate that to be an average of 6 cents savings by waiting until 6 p.m. To wait till 6 to save 6 should be the new slogan. that could mean an average fill-up savings a week of as much as $4 or $5 multiplied by 50 weeks. That's $200. So there's some solid advice here that I'm willing to give here and share in News Forum to ensure that people know that these predictions aren't just done because we can wrap numbers off. It's because we actually understand how gasoline pricing and the impact it has on affordability and people's ability to make ends meet. And by the way, Teresa, I know that we haven't talked about this in a long time. This is a little report that I wrote back in 1998. I've chaired it. It was the Liberal Committee on Gasoline Pricing when I was a member of Parliament. That goes to show you how long I've been at this. It's not something I've developed overnight. And gas price predictions just a little bit before that in 1996. So we're about 30 years in predicting gas prices. We tend to think on average we're pretty accurate, but accuracy aside, predictions aside, never buy your gasoline until 6 p.m. Finally, the Maritimes saw a pretty big increase, 7 to 9 cents a liter. That's because they hold off. They have a 1 week average price movement. They take 7 days, 5 days, put it together, and then come out with these weird formulas to give people a sense that they're getting a security blanket or some kind of better government tell them the price of gasoline in the markets because they feel the markets will rip them off. Kind of unusual, but I've long since given up on my frustration with that kind of top-down view of the world. I think Atlantic Canadians are owed a much better approach, and that's to have predictability, tell them day to day what the price is. Nevertheless, they saw a 9-cent increase in some instances, Nova Scotia, and certainly a little bit up there in Newfoundland. And so this morning, this might be the end of those such increases. At least next week, I'm anticipating we'll see about a 2 or 3 cent a liter decrease for Atlantic Canada, especially on the diesel side. Now, diesel this time of year tends to fall because it's no longer used as a proxy for heating oil. Temperatures are going up. And of course, this time of year, the real factors are, can refineries keep up with demand? And of course, do we also have a situation where we see the Canadian dollar having an impact? And we also know full well that hurricanes, other disruptions can force prices to go back up. So, Teresa, what we'll be watching for the next couple of weeks, prices as they go up technically during the summer and then come right back down as they will come September 15th. In the meantime, a lot of gas price predictions to come, so stay tuned, and I look forward to updating you again this time next week. Thanks, Teresa.
Delegations from Russia and Ukraine have met in Istanbul for their first direct peace talks in 3 years. A Ukrainian delegation led by the defense minister sat down Friday with a low-level Russian team headed by a presidential aide. Officials and observers expected the Turkish brokered talks to yield little immediate progress on stopping the more than 3-year war. A senior Ukrainian official accused Russia of making unacceptable demands during the peace talks. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said today that Kyiv's top priority is a full, unconditional, and honest ceasefire.
Our number one priority is a full, unconditional, and honest ceasefire. This must happen immediately to stop the killing and create a solid basis for diplomacy, first of all. And if the Russian representatives in Istanbul today cannot even agree to that, to ceasefire, to this clearly necessary first step, then it will be 100% clear that Putin continues to undermine diplomacy. If that's not the case, there must be at least some result today, starting with a ceasefire. The Ukrainian delegation has a mandate to make decisions. As we saw yesterday, Russia sent almost the same people it sent in 2022. This showed that Russia has not changed its basic approach. They make many statements, many threats, but solve nothing.
When speaking to reporters this morning in Abu Dhabi, President Trump was asked about the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine.
We'll see what happens with Russia and Ukraine. I think it's something that's just, we got to stop the killing. 5,000 people a week, 5,000 young people a week on average being killed in a war that is going nowhere. It's a shame. Should have never happened.
You said that you didn't expect him to go if you didn't go. The question might be then, when are you going to do it? Why wait?
Well, I think it's time for us to just do it. I said, they all said Putin was going and Zelensky was going, and I said, if I don't go, I guarantee Putin's not going. And he didn't go, and I understand that, but we're going to get it. We're going to get it done. We got to get it done. 5,000 young people are being killed every single week on average, and we're going to get it done.
And UN Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen posted a video on X with the caption, "Now is the time to intensify the pressure until Putin is also ready for peace."
Now we are 3 years on, and we could witness all during the last days President Putin's true belief. He first called for a ceasefire around the anniversaries of the 9th of May, which he then never respected. Then Ukraine, with the support of the European Union and the United States, called for full and unconditional ceasefire over 30 days, which President Putin then rejected. And finally, he offered a meeting directly between Ukraine and Russia in Turkey, but President Zelensky was ready to meet. President Putin never showed up. And this shows the true belief of President Putin. He does not want peace. So we have to increase the pressure. And this is why we're working on a new package of sanctions. This package will include, for example, sanctions on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. It will include working on listing more vessels of the Russian shadow fleet and also lowering the oil price cap. And it will include more sanctions on the financial sector in Russia. For us, it's important. We want peace, and therefore we have to increase the pressure on President Putin till he is ready for peace.
In one of the most populous cities in Canada, a troubling crisis continues to grow: child poverty. According to the latest 2023 report from Social Planning Toronto, over 1 in 4 children in Toronto now live in poverty, a sharp rise from 2020. The report highlights how poverty disproportionately impacts Indigenous, racialized, newcomer, and immigrant children, revealing deep-rooted inequalities that shape not only futures, but health outcomes for the very beginning of life. Behind the statistics are children struggling with limited access to nutritious food, stable housing, healthcare, and emotional support, all of which directly influence their physical and mental well-being. Dr. Abhishek Rout, medical director at Appletree Medical Group, joined us to unpack how poverty affects the health and well-being of children in Canada and what the long-term developmental consequences are for children who grew up in these conditions.
Well, child poverty really has quite profound and far-reaching effects on the health and well-being of children in Canada, beginning even before birth and then continuing throughout their lives. So even prenatally, poverty-related factors like maternal malnutrition, inadequate prenatal care, high-stress environments can all lead to poorer birth outcomes, such as low birth weight and increased risk of complications. During infancy and early childhood, poverty contributes to a lot of conditions like food insecurity, playing a huge role in nutritious meals that the children can have. Certainly, poor housing conditions can play a role as well for respiratory illness, asthma, and developmental delays. So as children grow, these effects will persist. Poverty is associated with a lower access to healthcare, meaning as you are perhaps sicker, you're actually also getting less access to healthcare at the same time. So what we see is delayed diagnoses for many chronic conditions. And certainly we start seeing educational barriers emerge as well, such as poor early childhood education and also academic struggles. I think we see a lot of long-term consequences here. I think there are huge impacts that we see, and it contributes almost to a cycle of poverty and health inequity there. Poverty contributes significantly to a lot of mental health stressors that we see, chronic stress and toxic stress. So children in poverty almost always will experience a chronic stress, which can result from the unstable housing and the food insecurity and financial strain. There's also a toxic stress that we talk about, which is really a prolonged exposure to hardship, which disrupts the brain development and affects a lot of emotional regulation and also increases the risk for anxiety disorders as well. Overall, we do see a higher risk of chronic illnesses. Children in poverty are more likely to develop asthma, obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease because of poor nutrition. And although these conditions do cause a lot of harm in early childhood, they also certainly cause a lot of harm later on as well. And then finally, we do see issues with weakened immune system. So chronic malnutrition and chronic food insecurity will contribute to just a higher rate of infections and slower recovery from illnesses, not just in childhood, but also in adulthood and also as we get much older.
Toronto's child poverty rate surged from 16.8% in 2020 to 25.3% in 2022. With these statistics in mind, Dr. Rout discussed what the immediate health implications of this significant increase are.
So that was an incredibly sharp rise in poverty. So going from 16.8 to 25.3 essentially it makes Toronto now the child poverty capital of Canada. So there's significant and immediate health implications for it. The immediate ones are, of course, increased food insecurity. So we're facing basically 1 in 4 children having struggled access to nutritious food, causing malnutrition, developmental delays. And then we see an increase in obesity as well, a higher risk of chronic illness, like we suggested before, with respiratory illness, asthma, and diabetes. We're seeing significant mental health struggles. This is something we've seen post-pandemic in general, but especially amongst people undergoing poverty as well. We see quite strong educational barriers. So poverty really limits our access to strong early childhood education. And that means extracurricular activities, that means stable learning environments, all of which are affecting cognitive development and increasing the likelihood of academic struggles later on in life as well.
Dr. Rout mentioned that children in poverty are more likely to experience mental health issues. So I asked him to elaborate on how economic hardship translates into conditions like anxiety and depression among children. Here's what he had to say.
I think the big concern here is also a very limited access to mental health support that we have. So certainly now 1 in 5 children in Canada has a diagnosed mental health condition. But if we look at what you can do with that mental health condition, it's very difficult to have access to affordable therapy and counseling, and that's for the most of us. So imagine if we are dealing with people who have poverty. So low-income families are going to face often much longer wait times for mental health services, which is leading to untreated depression and anxiety. Children in poverty may also struggle with bullying, low self-esteem, and social exclusion. We see this quite often as well. And we see that now in Canada, 1 in 4 children has difficulty making friends. Making friends is actually expensive. And so further exacerbating these mental health challenges for people already at risk.
An athlete aims to be the first person to swim around an island in Massachusetts to educate the public on sharks. Lewis Pugh will attempt to swim in 47-degree water during the start of white shark migration season, and it will correspond with the 50th anniversary of the film Jaws. The 55-year-old swimmer says that they were labeled by the 1975 blockbuster film as cold-blooded killers, and he wants to change the perception of the vulnerable animals. He'll urge for more protections for the animals while he completes the 99-kilometer swim in about 12 days. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to visit our social media handles. Good night, Canada.